Good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we're pleased to have everyone with us. I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions, and I will be the voice of the webinar this morning. Today is the season finale for Season 3 of Reset and Go in our Saturdays are for Learning with Luminary segment. We present the final episode of Revive and Thrive. And for the final time this season, gear up and get your learning on. In today's segment of Revive and Thrive, we are discussing high-performing teams. Do they really exist? An exchange of real experiences and validated ideas on which to leverage your success and truly thrive. Our subject matter experts, and we are truly honored to have them on the panel this morning, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ruwani Hettiarachchi, Chief Growth Officer, HEMAS Holdings PLC. Joining her is Chandana Wijayanama, Organization and Human Resources Director at Siam City Cement, and Anushka Polnovita, Chief Operations Officer at Drive One. Steering the conversation this morning is Gihan Malshan, a trainer with Luminary Learning Solutions. And on that note, diving right in, Gihan, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anton. Very good morning to all of you. Delighted to be here with the esteemed panel. And then today's topic is high-performing teams. Do they really exist? Like Anton said, let's have a discussion around this so that we can see with real-life experiences and then thoughts of our panelists, whether do they really exist in organizational context. To start off proceedings, I would like to start off with defining what a high-performing team is. And then I would like to pose this question in general to our panelists, because when you say high-performing teams, there are teams which meet their KPI objectives. Do we consider them as high-performing teams? And then there are teams who meet KPI objectives, plus they are kind of on their own, they are self-managing within that team, requires very less supervision. And then we have seen teams who achieve their KPI objectives, requires less supervision, and then innovative as well. They come up with their own solutions which are in line with organizational priorities, which makes the life easier when it's come to achieving a bigger set objectives. So are all these considered as high-performing teams, or what is it that we really consider as high-performing team? How we define a high-performing team? I would like to get thoughts on this to start proceedings.
Okay, good morning to everyone. I'm Chandana. Maybe I will start and let my colleagues speak after me. So I do believe high-performing teams exist, and we can see them when we see the results, and then we start to wonder, what make them perform like that. So that's the tip of the iceberg. But actually, if you really look what really make them perform that way, then we can find the reason. So what I believe is they are all grouped around the purpose, a purpose that is very clear to them. And in organizations, you have these high-performing teams in various corners. Sometimes certain organizations come out as one group of high-performing organization. So that's what I think as a beginning, as a definition to this.
Yeah, I also agree with Chandana. I think we see in many areas of a working place, or in general, you get teams that are always outperforming and achieving their targets consistently all the time. So there is there is a high performance team concept going, and it's pretty evident. You always see in a big organization or in sport or whatever, there is those teams who consistently deliver the set objective. So I do agree with Chandana as well.
I'm going to also have to be boring and agree with my colleagues that yes, of course they do exist, and I think the definitions given have been fairly accurate too. A high performance team, I like the word that Anushka used, consistent. It consistently delivers. A team is something that makes things, a team is something that makes a unit that makes things happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. A consistently high-performing team consistently sets its goals and achieves them. So certainly, I do believe that we can observe, across many different areas of life, of the military. We can take a look at how the COVID task force is being put together at the government and make observations of where teams are consistently performing and achieving and outperforming and exceeding expectations. So certainly I do have to agree with my colleagues that they do exist, and definitions given have been fairly good.
Okay, thank you. I think we all agree it's a combination of all these. It's not just achieving KPIs, because just achieving KPIs would not make a team a high performing team by the definition what we are really looking at. And then we have talked about different examples. I would like to stay with you, Ruwani, for the next question, because I understand this is sometimes common sense. When we see a team, we know whether they are really performing or not, or whether they kind of match the definition of high performing teams. Instinctively, we know. I mean, when we are looking at them and when we are evaluating their performance, when we are looking at their behavior. But if I were to ask, what are the attributes of a high-performing team? If we were to list down and then say that, okay, these are the attributes of a high-performing team, what would they be?
Right. So teams can come together organically, or sometimes teams are orchestrated and designed and composed by different individuals. If I were to sort of remark on what my observations of the characteristics of a high performance team are, I really like the word that Chandana used, which is purposeful. Teams that have a goal, they have a mission in mind, they've got something to achieve, they've got a reason that they exist. So I would say that a team that is composed around achieving a single purpose is often a team that is highly motivated to deliver, that's highly driven because they've got a single-mindedness. A second attribute, I would say, are motivated. So it's a team that is incredibly incentivized and motivated. And this is where I suppose my colleagues from human resources can add a little bit more detail, because the system of incentives and activities that go into motivating and incentivizing individuals and teams to deliver is very complex. It differs from organization to organization, differs from industry to industry. It differs where you are in the team within the organization. So what is it that's really motivating you to deliver? So if you're a sales unit within an organization, you're incredibly motivated to drive revenues. You might be working in another different part of the organization that's highly motivated to deliver cost savings or improvements in working capital. You might be highly motivated to, like I am, to close deals and do acquisitions. So what are the ways in which my incentives are designed is very important. So that's a good, a well-designed system of incentives that motivates a team is a really important second attribute. I would say a third attribute is probably a team that has been thoughtfully and carefully composed to ensure that there is both a diversity, that the requisite set of skills and attributes to achieve a certain goal have been carefully thought through, and attention has been paid to ensure that there's a balance, or that there's a specific concentration of skills. So perhaps if we're I have to keep using my examples of mergers and acquisitions. We want to make sure that there's enough people who've got experience in corporate finance, people who've got experience on the legal side. If you're working to, if you're a pilot on a mission, you've got to make sure that you've got enough hours and time on that aircraft and that you've run those kinds of missions before. So what are the real skills? And this is where the difficulty comes in, because the size and the composition really, really matters in a team. A team that's too big would often mean that there's a lot of groupthink, and decision making is slow. Similarly, a very high level team that's too small also becomes very slow, because these individuals are tasked with making difficult decisions, and they might rarely get to meet. So composition. And then fourth is just really, does this team understand what is expected of them with respect to rhythm and dynamics and expectations, really? So, how often are we supposed to meet? What decisions do we make? When I communicate in this fashion, does my team member understand what I'm trying to do and deliver? So the rhythm, the composition, the dynamics, the expectations around all of the softer stuff is also another really important thing. So for example, if you're a pilot in a commercial airliner, you would understand that there's certain signals, verbal signals and cues that you'd give your the members of the rest of the cockpit, your first officer, or your engineer, which immediately signal something that the rest of us, a layperson looking on, would never really understand. If you're a sports person, the visual cues or the physical cues that you'd give a team member would indicate something. So that having that interesting and very unique set of communication attributes is also another sort of fourth attribute that I would say is a mark of a high performance team.
Okay. Thanks, Ruwani. That's really insightful. And then I would like to pose my next question to Chandana, building up on what you have said. In the start, you said teams are sometimes put together organically, and then sometimes they're kind of composed. I would like to build up on that point, and then to ask Chandana, how do you really build a high-performing team? I mean, we know in organizational context, sometimes you don't have the liberty of selecting your, team unless you are really, unless you are kind of driving a specific project, or unless you are at a kind of leadership position where you can really demand and say that this is what my team should be. But I mean, at first line leadership level, even sometimes second line leadership level, you don't have the liberty of selecting your team. You will have to work with what is given to you. And then if a team is given to you, how do you kind of make them a high performing team? How do you build a high performing team?
I think that's a very interesting question. And I think I would take the approach of differentiating or distinguishing between work groups and teams. Because if you are to make a work group, I think that's relatively easily done. You can put together a task force or a work group for a short-term goal. Then the dynamics there would be slightly different, mainly because the focus on trust is less in the work group. But for a team, I think very, very important ingredient, while I agree with Ruwani for all these points she mentioned, I would also throw in trust as a very important element in any team. Because otherwise, what happens is eventually there would be conflicts happening within the teams, and with conflicts going on, these teams can crumble. So, but if you have trust among your team members, that can be easily resolved. So usually, when you're grouped around a common purpose, then a leader's role would be to put together this team, and sometimes it happens organically. Certain volunteer organizations, for example, after tsunami, we saw so many people coming together for this common purpose of serving the fellow countrymen. But sometimes you have to create them. So there are, I think, a few elements that we must clarify. One is this role. Within a team, you need to clarify the roles. You need to clarify the goals of that team. Purpose is clear, but what are your next goals? And then the roles. Who would do which part? Then you have to also appoint a leader, and a leader who is trustworthy, who can actually understand the teammates, their strengths and weaknesses. That's also very, very important. So often in organizations, the top team are called to put together certain teams. Sometimes even at the mid-level of the organizations, your managers are tasked to put together smaller teams. So there are different tools that are used by organizations. For example, job description is a simple tool where you clarify the role, of the person. And there are certain policies in the organization. And there's relentless communication on the purpose, vision, and mission of the organization. So I think these are some of the tools and activities that may help to create these teams. I'm still talking at a very, very high level, but when it comes to a small team, I think there we can actually understand these dynamics a little bit better. Largely the role of the leader, I think, is very, very important. The person who you appoint as the leader, because most of the time in corporate organizations, you appoint a leader. Of course, you need to look at the background. You need to, see whether the appointed leader is credible. So that's the job of the managers of that, appointment. But I think it's very, very important. And then that leader has to, keep that team together, motivate them. We talked about motivation earlier on as well. Ruwani mentioned about it. I think it's a very important factor. My experience somehow is, I also get to answer this question being in HR, how you motivate people. But I have a very a common answer to this. I don't know whether everyone would agree or love it, but it's, the person who can motivate you, you can find in front of a mirror, right? Others can sometimes, help you to, make you understand certain things, but it's up to you to motivate yourself. You need to be self-motivated. Yeah. So then when you put, when you craft that team, you need to identify people who are motivated for certain things, certain activities, certain tasks. So the person who put together that team should understand that abilities and inabilities of your teammates. And I mean, we can discuss about it. I think celebrate, when you hit success, celebrate, very, very important as well for the sustenance of those teams.
Thank you, Chandana. I think that's very comprehensive, and then it gives enough depth in terms of understanding how you kind of go on building a high-performing team. I would like to pick up on 2 points from that. One thing is leader's role. I mean, I'm sure all of us agree that really plays a key role in terms of building a high-performing team. I would like to turn towards Anushka on this question. I mean, how important it is when it's come to maintaining a performance or building a high-performing team, how important is team leader's role in a high-performing team?
Yeah, again, I think it is very important. I think Chandana also touched a little while ago. I would break it into 2 contexts. When you say high-performance teams, we see certain teams performing better than others consistently, as I mentioned earlier, all the time. So you have teams that perform highly all the time, and then you create high-performance teams. So on both these areas, leadership have a greater role through it's a highly skilled group of individuals who come together, but that common purpose, the reason that they have come together has to be clearly defined. That's when a team would continue to achieve over and above the expectation. If I take the organically high performing teams, it is that communication given by the leader that motivates them and allows them to consistently perform well. So I think leader's role is key. I mean, you see very often in general in sport, you have teams of high performing individuals, but they don't deliver. But high performance teams delivery, I contribute to a great deal to the leader who communicates the purpose very clearly and the individuals understand it, because success, again, a team success is individuals with different strengths coming together and helping others weak areas to perform or deliver. So that leader's role plays a huge role in my thinking in any team, organization, or in a like a group coming together, like Ruwani said, even the COVID task. So I think the leadership has a greater role in their success or failure, because sometimes you want to create a high performance team and you get different individuals coming together to achieve an objective, but once they're put together, if their role or the path has not been clearly defined or give them that motivation or the incentive, it will not work.
Thanks, Anushka. I would like to stay with you for the next question as well. You mentioned sport teams. Okay, in general, we kind of associate good bosses with great teams, but sometimes it does not directly translate into performance. I mean, when it's come to high performing teams in organizational context, particularly in sports, coaches put their team through a lot of pressure, and then sometimes they are really hard on their players, but the team performs superlatively. I mean, how does this translate to organizational context? And then what can we kind of learn from these in when it's translated to organizational context?
When you say hard on the players, it depends on. Thing is, to get the best out of a team, the leader or the coach, as you mentioned in a sports organization, needs to understand each individual, what really ticks them, what triggers their best out of them. So you need to address each individual differently. Like if you take a team, say, I mean, an example I will bring, the IPL and Mumbai Indians. It's a team of so many highly skilled international and Indian players coming together, but the coach's role in Mahela, how he was able to understand, identify each other's sticking points and addressing it. Some individuals need a bit of a kick on their back, but others need a different way of motivation. So I think, again, I go back to the leader's role in understanding what really motivates or triggers each individual. Sometimes I've seen in a local context, in a corporate level, some of our employees need a bit of a sort of a push all the time. So you need to be stern, but some people get demotivated by that. So you need to understand and address each individual in order to bring the best out of them. That's where I think organic high performance teams come together, is because when they understand each other and motivate each other to drive to their end objective. So I personally feel, being stern, or if I rephrase it, being direct and clear communication in the tone of how you do it depends on the receiver or the individuals in your team.
Thanks, Anushka. So it's contextualized, and then it's to do with how best you know your team members, and then what approach that you take in terms of motivating them and then understanding them better. Because once I had a leader, I mean, a sales manager whom I reported to, when he was asked the question, how do you manage your team really well? Because he was a high performing manager and the entire team was, he said, I don't manage my team, I understand them. so that I don't have to manage them.
I fully agree with that in terms of leadership.
Yes. Then I would like to turn towards Chandana for my next question. During this, we talked about leader understanding team members' role or each team member individually so that they leader can motivate them and then understand what triggers them. I would like to go to the other side of this, the team members' role. Uh, what are team members' roles in high-performing teams? Because theoretically, we know that there are so many, roles in a team where each member have to perform other than be kind of delivering on their task. So what are team members' role in high-performing teams, Chandana?
Yeah, so that's the other side of the coin, of course. So again, the purpose, yeah, you're going to do something, you're going to achieve something, you're in a team for something. And then if you're getting blurred with your line of sight, like we drive a car, right? When the rain comes down, you put on your wipers. So you need to somehow, do something for that, right? So then the best person you can lean on is your leader, the person that, would support you and motivate you. So then you go and check and readjust, realign. You can also do it with your colleagues. Sometimes you don't have to trouble your leader all the time. But certain things you may want to, have that one-on-one with your leader and clarify and realign and re-energize. I think it's very, very important. And sometimes there are times that you're not going to be able to perform, be able to, carry on a certain task. So I think it's fair to go and tell to everybody, this part I am not so good at. So when you're in a team that is trusted, when there's trust within that team, there's no shame in sharing that, and there's no shame or issue in having a conflict even with somebody else. And a lot of times, how the leader's role in managing the conflict and how the teammates' role in managing and resolving that conflict would determine whether you're going to end up successfully or not. We have seen this type of things in sports, in corporate life, in country, politics. We see it everywhere.
Sure. Thanks, Chandana. I think, like you said, we have seen it everywhere, and then we know that high performance teams kind of just doesn't come together just like that. I mean, they also have their conflicts. They also go through all these motions of kind of trusting each other and then coming to the level of performing highly, delivering high performance on a consistent basis. On that note, I would like to turn towards Ruwani for my next question. I would say that this is kind of get drilled down to the culture that the team has, because Chandan mentioned that you need to be if you're not clear about your kind of objective or of your line of sight, you need to be able to talk to your colleague or to your manager. Or if you're not doing something right, then you need to be able to talk to them, even to have a conflict, or resolve a conflict within the team. I would say team culture plays a major role here. Bruni, in your experience, do high-performing teams have subcultures? If so, how important it is for a team to have its own subculture?
Right. That's a really interesting question. So I suppose if a team is representative of a broader organization, it should embody the best of that organization's cultures, if it's a high-performing team. So if the culture of the organization is, say, to be modest, to be punctual, to be respectful of other people's time, to be humble, then what one would hope and expect is that a very high-performing team, that organization, is representing the best of that that businesses or that organizations' cultures. I think there is in my experience, there is an element of where, a high performance team can get carried away if you're consistently performing and you're consistently being recognized and rewarded. There is the possibility that egos can take over and you end up on the sort of further side of perhaps, being arrogant and being not being able to gel with the rest of the organization. So that's actually when a culture will start to be perhaps toxic or start degrading at the expense of its own performance. So we've seen that happen as well. So we've seen teams that have consistently, year after year after year, if they're consistently winning, if they're consistently achieving, they may, and it's not always the team, but it's sometimes individuals within the team may start feeling, start corroding the atmosphere in that team, because, okay, we're the best, we're winning, we're consistently achieving, we're the best in this business, we're the best in this group, no one can touch us. So that attitude obviously, can be corrosive to a team. And I think you can't have a discussion about teams, as my colleagues have pointed out, without having a discussion about leadership. So naturally, the leader's role in that context should certainly be to come back to, first principles, the basic, the purpose of the team and why it was achieved. So do teams have their own subcultures? I think absolutely. If you're consistently being singled out and differentiated, you will start where I think leaders can play a good role here is in ensuring that culture doesn't become too toxic, where that individuals get, consistently are reminded of what their purpose is, and that the team in itself and the culture of that team in itself becomes something aspirational rather than too distinctive within an organization. So I think we've seen this happen in several different areas. I mean, you see it happening in life, even in the Sri Lankan government. There are certain line ministries who are consistently performing very well, consistently effective, consistently outshining the rest of their colleagues. They should be held up as a shining example to perhaps other units of the government who can stand to achieve much more there. So I think yes, the answer is teams do have their own subcultures. Those cultures, in an ideal world, should embody the culture of the broader organization, and leaders should strive to make the culture something aspirational and hopefully inclusive rather than exclusive.
Sure. Thanks, Ruwani. It shed some lights about the culture and then the importance of having a subculture and then aligning it to the organizational culture so that both the team and as well as the organization is also aligned. Next question, I would like to turn towards Anushka. We talked about organization and then how important it is to have the team's culture aligned to organization. When you look at it from a broad organizational perspective, how important high-performing teams to an organization? What does these high-performing teams bring to the organization?
Well, it's every corporate head's ideal situation to have high-performance teams going on in an organization, but it doesn't really work that way. You have certain teams who perform consistently, so it's important to have break it down when you're forming teams for different goals. Say, for example, just a normal day-to-day activities from, say, sales to marketing to whatever roles. You build teams hoping that they will outperform or perform and achieve their set targets. But as well as, say, from a senior management point of view, you will probably come together for certain specific short-term achieving of short-term goals, or certain teams are formed in various contexts. I mean, ideal situation is that you have all teams performing to their expectation, but it doesn't happen that way. So in terms of when you're creating teams in an organization, you need to when you're bringing in the best people together, you need to understand, as we discussed earlier, the purpose, the objectives, and what they need to achieve. But if you have can appoint the right leaders to those specific teams, and have small enough teams that can really communicate clearly and understand and get the feedback from them, and you create each team with that purpose of them being high performers, then they will probably deliver. You see in organizations, in certain, say like a sales team is quite a large team, so sometimes you expect the sales manager to drive all of them in that same direction, which doesn't happen. Sometimes you see in bigger corporates, they understand that, and they make smaller clusters or smaller teams within that big team in order to achieve those targets. So there you see each of these sub teams performing exceptionally well. Therefore, the overall team performs very well. I think in a bigger corporate organization also, it depends on how the structure is made and how big or small the teams are to achieve those specific objectives. So I think that's what I see in high performance teams, and they're in a corporate world to the success of the overall objective of a company.
Sure. Thanks, Ajay. You mentioned interesting point. Sometimes, because we all understand, sometimes all teams in the organization may not perform at peak for the organization to thrive. But you mentioned that sometimes managers or leaders create sub teams within the divisions so that they get those sub teams to perform at peak, so that the organization would thrive as a whole. In context, do we consider the entire organization as a team, or do we consider departments? For example, if I may take finance, or do we consider functions? Because if you take finance, there are certain sub functions within that. For example, payments, account receivable, and then sourcing. You can go on naming stuff, and then there could be smaller teams even within those sub functions. So what is this unit that you identify as a team, so that you evaluate them whether they are performing or delivering high performance or not?
Personally, I think all of these can be considered teams. At Drive One, we are relatively small new organization. We try to call our whole company a team, and that we try to get them together, and we all treat each other as team members. But in terms of achieving objectives, you need to break it down into those smaller group specific groups, like you mentioned, the finance team, the marketing team, the logistics team, the work technical team. So you need to break it down, and you when you evaluate performance, you evaluate the performance of that particular team, because say from a board of directors or the investor point of view, for them the whole company is one team, and they try to keep everyone motivated, incentivized, and do all these things to keep everybody motivated. But when you break down the responsibilities of line managers and other managers, and you go down to the bottom of the pyramid, then you need to basically create those sub teams and call them the team, and evaluate those groups of people whom you call a team on their set targets and their performance. Therefore, you overall it'll come up where the whole corporate object. At the end of the day, we all work for a certain purpose or a vision of a organization. So that whole organizational sub teams coming together itself is a big team, and to achieve those target or the try to achieve the vision of the organization. So I feel in personally, I would call each one teams in a different context, like as the company, as you asked, and individual teams that we discussed.
Sure. So it's basically how you evaluate, how you look at things, and then end of the day, entire organization is considered as a one team, because everyone is driving towards one purpose,
Absolutely.
which is achieve organization's vision and mission. For the next question, I would like to turn towards Ruwani, because one important thing which came up is we look at, while considering entire organization as a one single unit, but we look at different functions. And then, Ruwani, I'm sure with your experience, where you deal with a lot of organizations in your day-to-day kind of performing day-to-day job, what are the common mistakes that organizations do that kills high-performing teams?
That's a great question. Now, what kills high-performing teams? So, I think not setting a great purpose or deviating from a purpose, perhaps. So if an organization has acknowledged that this is our goal, this is our mission, but tends to compromise those along the way, there's no point really having a highly motivated, highly skilled set of individuals chasing behind that if they feel leadership will compromise or forget what it's really standing here for. So I think that tends to kill the motivation of a team. That could certainly. Complexity also kills high-performing teams. When I refer to high-performing teams, I'm always thinking about individuals who are driven with a sense of urgency and who are highly skilled and who are like, racehorses, basically, with blinkers on, are working very, very hard to achieve something. So if an organization is exceptionally complex in the way it makes decisions, and the decision-making points are not very clear, then what ends up happening is that projects end up stalling, and that depletes the energy of a team. So if we are not sure whether the board of directors is making this decision, or the CEO is empowered to make this decision, or perhaps a board subcommittee is empowered, or is it the head of the team who is empowered to make the decision, or if the decision keeps getting, to go ahead with the final project getting passed, if the buck keeps getting passed, then certainly it would deplete the energy of anyone. And I think that's one other area where you're certainly going to find a depletion of energy. Other things that certainly, poor communication can kill a team. So particularly, if there's not enough good communication as to, who is in charge, who is delivering what, how do we, I think, that if it can all become a shambles, if there's no leader appointed, and if there's no set expectations on how we communicate and how we deliver. The other and very common mistake I think that happens in Sri Lanka and in most organizations that I've encountered is under-resourcing of teams. So you can have all these grand ambitions, but ultimately teams need to be well-resourced to deliver, right? So if it's financial and capital resources, or if it's having the necessary skills. And I think we frequently find our situations when, our eyes are bigger than our stomachs. We'd love to go after several different investment opportunities, but often we're strapped with the resources of what we can deliver. So what ends up happening is highly skilled individuals in that team will start feeling, well, what's the purpose? What's the point of actually working really hard and doing analysis and doing feasibilities and working towards a goal if at the end of it we can't really commercialize an idea because we don't have the resources or we're not willing to put the resources behind something? Then those are 3 or 4 areas where I feel you can certainly trip up a highly skilled team.
Sure. Thanks, Ruwani. I would like to build on one area which you mentioned, and then to stay with you for the next question as well, because you mentioned complexity of the organization and then the culture of that correlates with the culture of the organization, because we know culture is driven by the leadership, and then it kind of comes down all the way from the top leadership to say that, okay, what's the organizational culture, and then what sort of complexities, what sort of bureaucracies, what sort of kind of ways of work in the organization has. So what role does culture plays in terms of having high performing teams in a particular organization?
I suppose back to my earlier point is, what is the culture of the organization? Is the there's culture with a big C and culture with a small c. And these are very big. These are huge behavioral patterns that often organizations we get sunk into those behavioral patterns, and we find it very hard to let go of it. So what is the real culture of the organization? What's the DNA of that organization? And that really drives decision making. So I can give you a more recent example, try and make it as abstract as possible. At a recent decision making point in one of our projects, we decided to make a fairly big, not a U-turn, but a fairly big structural decision based on the culture of the organization. We said, okay, this is not who we are. This is not, we absolutely will not be able to achieve this goal based on who we are and how we behave. So a decision was made on that basis. And a decision was really made taking into account who we are, what we can and what we cannot achieve, taking into account our limitations and how we prefer to behave. Because really culture determines behavior. So culture in this instance determines strategy, and that determines the direction in which the team takes. So that's an interesting, I don't think organizations really think this way quite often. I think in Sri Lanka we have an extremely, what I really like about Sri Lankan corporates is that we're very in tune with our DNA and our culture. We always put a lot of emphasis on how we interact with each other, how we respect, each other and the values with which we want to interact. And that's not often the case. What you usually find is you'd say, okay, this is our strategy, this is how we'll choose to compete, these are the actions and steps in which we'll take, and we'll go for that. But in this situation, we really said, okay, this is the DNA, these are the limitations of that this DNA actually brings to us. To be a little bit more descriptive, essentially we are the nice guys. We can't play dirty. So therefore we chose to take a certain path and take a certain set of decisions because we absolutely can't play dirty. So that really determines kind of the people that you put around the table. That determines, your how your team, achieves that end objective as well.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you so much for that example, Ruwani. I think that really kind of get the message across. Like you said, most of the time, sometimes organizations are kind of not deliberately making those decisions considering culture, but like you said, instinctively we sometimes go ahead with it because we know this is the way we work things. And then in your example, I think integrity as a kind of key pillar in the organization's culture would have probably driven that decision to say that, okay, this is not the path we are going to take because this is not who we are. And then we will not want to go down that road even to get this business. From here, I would like to talk about maintaining team performance. And then for this next question, I would like to turn towards Chandana. We talked about high performance teams or teams performing at their peak, but like we discussed earlier, we understand that teams does not come to this stage at once. There are certain stages that the team kind of passes, and then there are certain phases team passes. So one thing is a team is performing peak, and then that's great. I think Ruwani mentioned that sometimes kind of team performance or team's energy get depleted due to certain reasons. And then I would say maintaining team performance is a bigger task than actually getting a team to perform at peak, because you can get a team to perform at peak once or twice and then kind of forget about it, but maintaining would be a bigger task. So Chandana, with your experience, what you have seen, and then what you can tell us about how do you maintain performance at peak?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question that every leader has to, maintain that good performance, to make sure that it's not a flash in the pan and it's not one-off. I think basically people, all the teammates have to realize, we are here for a reason. We are here for a purpose. and it needs to be revitalized. It needs to be reminded every now and then. And then also the leader also, I think, has a great role in revitalizing that. Throw a different challenge, because people don't like to do the same thing over and over again. They need the next challenge. They need a new challenge for them to work on. So how do you make it more interesting? How do you make it more meaningful for your teammates? I think that's what a leader needs to consistently think about. So for this, sometimes you may have to create disruptions, and disruptions that make them rethink, very craftfully, in a way that it doesn't break the team. I think you need to create disruptions, and that may help, creating a new situation. There, I think we also talk about coaching, mentoring. I think that also would really play a role there. You can't just create a disruption and stay away or look away. I think you need to, do that mentoring thing with your teammates. Then, of course, you have people who have different abilities within your team. Your accountant is also maybe someone who can, do a procurement task in your organization. But that person, since he's a good accountant, should not be there all the time. We need to maybe, change these roles a little bit and give them a newer challenge. The individual development plans, the succession planning in the organization, all these are planning tools you have to, look at the organization holistically and move people around, create some manageable disruptions. I think that is very important. And then earlier on, we talked about culture, putting together a new culture, because that is also very, very important when you have these disruptions going in. One example I can remember is I once worked in an organization, a global organization called HOSIM, and we put together a global team, 24 different nationalities, and we knew little about each other's backgrounds. But the person, the leader who put together the team, he was convinced that these people are very good at different tasks, and to go through the this forming part was good, but as you know, there are like 4 different stages in getting a team to perform. So forming, storming, norming, and performing. So these people who we got into that team, global team, were very good performers in different organizations. But when you put them into a new context, again, you can see this storming happening. After a while, after 1 month is gone, there are certain storms happening. But then leaders' role in making sure these storms are healthy conflicts, not trust busters. I think very, very important. And then then you can convert that energy into healthy conflicts after all. I think that's very important. One practical example or activity we did, we had this in our team culture, we had a thing called "How do you feel?" exercise, right? So how do you do that? You have a small object with you. It can be a ball, or it can be some soft toy. You throw, you get into a circle and you throw it to each and every person, and that person would tell how that person feels on that day. So that became a very, very good way of sharing your real feelings and getting over with this conflicts very soon, openly addressing them. So that became part of our culture in that team for years to come. So I think those tactics you can use to keep your performance at a high level.
Super. I think that's a really interesting activity. And then to understand about your colleagues or team members, how they feel, especially in your example, since they are from 24 different nationalities, I think that would have kind of immensely helped in terms of understanding each other. So we have reached to the last 5 minutes of our today's conversation. Finally, what kind of tips that we can give to nurture and maintain high-performing teams? I'll start off with you, Chandana.
Yeah, I think again, the trustbusters are there. I think we must look at them, especially when you micromanage too much as a leader. That kills the individual motivation. And when you have favorites within your teams, that kills the contribution of everybody else. And when you don't communicate enough, when you don't openly address issues, that also makes it difficult. You can also, as individuals who are working in the team, you can also be very open and honest about where you are in and get support or seek help. I think that's also very important. And I think it can't be stressed enough that the common purpose of that team need to be repeated, stated. I think that's very important as well.
Sure. Thanks, Chandana. Anushka, Ruwani, your final thoughts and then tips to nurture and maintain a high-performing team.
As Chandana mentioned, quick tips. I think communication has to be very clear, so that and also motivation, and consistently high performance teams should be challenged every now and then to get even better results from them, and communication and a clear purpose, what we discuss, are key elements to get the best out of individuals and the teams. And I think the leadership roles has to be properly defined or selected the right people to lead in order to get the best out of teams and for them to deliver high performance.
Okay. Thanks, Anushka. Ruwani, over to you.
Thanks. I think just my colleagues have put it perfectly. So just to reiterate, certainly empower, motivate with difficult targets. So give people stretch targets. High performance teams should not be achieving things that everyone else can achieve. Appoint a great leader and let them run. I think that's the thing. So you've got to motivate, empower them, give them enough agency and authority to deliver. And I think you start finding that highly skilled people will start rallying around the cause and exceed your expectations.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm not going to summarize what we discussed today because we have discussed about so many areas related to high performing teams. I don't want to take the chance of missing out on important points. I think you shared the experience with your in your personal life or corporate life, which shed light to get the thought across to our audience. I'm sure it has given them kind of enough simplicity in terms of understanding the thought or the point that we were discussing about. Thank you so much, Ruwani, Chandana, and Anushka, for being here today and then sharing your experiences, thoughts about high-performing teams. Do they really exist? Yes, they do. And then there's so much around, so much that people or the organizations will have to do in terms of managing, maintaining high-performing teams. So thank you so much. Anton, over to you.
Thank you, Gihan. Sadly, all good things come to an end, and in what seems like a blink of an eye, an hour has passed us by. Thank you everyone who joined in and stayed locked on for this wonderful hour. Once again, thank you to Ruwani, Chandana and Anushka for weighing in. What a delightful conversation indeed. There's so much to take away, so much to learn. Gihan, thank you very much for steering this conversation so brilliantly. As we rightly heard, I guess, the difference between success and failure is a great team. And a successful leader is clearly made by his or her ability to spur on that team to work well together and achieve those common vision and goals. The words I would leave is coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. Leaving you with these thoughts for the final time this season. Thank you very much to H1 for being our technology partner, for going strong with us for the 3rd season running. Special thanks to Samarth Fernando and his team, Rashintha, for being with us throughout all our webinars over the past 10 weeks. Great support once again. Coming up in the next hour is This, That and the Other, Season 2 with Varun. Do join in. It starts at 11 o'clock. They are discussing this morning the good, bad and the ugly of yet another controversial topic, and as usual, and today there is no exception as they dissect the topic pseudoscience in corporate training, separating the fact from fiction. On that note, enjoy the rest of the day, stay safe, stay productive.